A lot of things were altered after the Super Genesis Wave, and although a lot of it revolves around Sonic, which, I mean, given the name of the comic, it's pretty understandable, I feel as though it'd be interesting to see how Eggman was also affected by this. Namely, the Eggman Empire, which was now led by a group of egg bosses, who were animals and not eggs. So without further ado, let's take a look at each of the egg bosses in somewhat chronological order and do a quick overview of who their characters are and just a little bit about each of them. Just be warned, some of them have a lot of interesting stuff story-wise, while others are Axel the Waterbuffalo, who coincidentally is the first one we're going to be looking at in this new world. Axel is the first of the egg bosses that Eggman meets after the Super Genesis Wave, and Axel overall is a very loyal soldier, probably mostly due to fear that he has towards Eggman, but his overall loyalty explains just how he managed to become the egg boss of the Africa Plains in the first place. There honestly isn't a ton else to say about him, as Eggman spends a pretty short amount of time here, but Axel does have this cool Mad Max-esque style army, so I mean that's something. The next egg boss we would meet is also actually pretty lackluster, and that's Hood. Hood is basically a Viper from XCOM, except he's lacking any snitties, so he took the next best thing that he could find, which was being an egg boss. But for real, there isn't actually that much to be said about Hood other than, well, he seems kind of nervous. Oh, and also he can cause people to have vertigo with his spots. Unrelated to Viper, but at the same time that Eggman met Viper, Eggman also goes on this mech adventure while visiting Hood, and it's very much so inspired by SA2, and that's just fun overall. Okay, now finally we're on to someone a little bit more interesting, and that's Tundra. And so with him we've got some actual plot to look at. Tundra is the leader of the Arctica Egg Army, and he's got some interesting backstory as the chief of his tribe. Not only would it be revealed later that Tundra is Rotor's dad, like Rotor the freedom fighter, who after the Super Genesis Wave was made extremely swole, Tundra overall never really connected though with his son, and while being very dismissive towards, well, just about everything that Rotor did, caused Rotor to eventually be pushed away and he ran away from home. On top of that, we would also find out that Tundra's wife and, of course, Rotor's mom had suffered from a disease and ultimately succumbed to that unknown disease that she had, which left Tundra alone without any family, and he eventually gave up his tribe to the Eggman Empire, where he now served with his rival from another tribe, Akhlut, who actually is inspired by an Inuit mythology creature, and I mean, that's pretty cool. Next up are Cassia and Clove, a pair of Pronghorn sisters who, full disclosure, are my absolutely favorite egg bosses, and so there's going to be a little bit of bias here. They each have this really cool design. Clove looks very stoic and serious, whereas Cassia has this really interesting look with her cybernetic enhancements. They also have this really sweet relationship between each other where Clove really seems to care for her sister's well-being, and overall they're just really fun characters who are made even more interesting by the fact that they have this pretty dark backstory. We'd find out much later after they were introduced during a fight that Cassia was having against Bunny, that Cassia would admit to having gone through with the roboticization due to the fact that she had no other choice. We'd learn that Cassia was actually incredibly sick. She was blinded and deafened by her illness, which made joining the Eggman Empire the only option to help her get through all of this with the cybernetics which helped cure her ailments. We'd then find out, however, that all is not alright with Cassia, as she's still actually sick, and that Eggman more or less basically lied to them to hold them hostage, and that if Clove wants to help Cassia, she's gonna have to keep working for him, or he'll stop using his robotics to help her. This really reminds us that Eggman, honestly, is probably the worst, and that making a deal with him is pretty much the equivalent of making a deal with the devil. And it makes Cassia and Clove these really interesting, sympathetic villains. Alright, moving on to the next one, we have Thunderbolt, who was initially teased as this creepy silhouette. Out of all the egg bosses, Thunderbolt is probably the most loyal, as she's actually just a huge Eggman fan, and works for him as an enforcer inside of her giant mech suit, and true to her name, she can use electric powers. She was first introduced setting up a trap in an attempt to stop Sonic and his friends from stealing more of the Chaos Emeralds from the Eggman Empire. Her fight though would be pretty short-lived, as Sonic would go full rage in his werehog form, and yeah, that's a whole subject for another day, but let's move past it and just accept that as of right now, Sonic can turn into a werehog, just like that video game. And anyways, that juiced out Stretch Armstrong would cause enough of a ruckus that Thunderbolt would eventually just have to run off. Sonic would end up meeting one other egg boss who is Nephthys the Vulture. And honestly, Nephthys is a pretty interesting character. She's got a pretty cool looking design, and she was also the goddess of the air in Egyptian mythology, which is also very interesting. However, after her design, things get pretty meh in my opinion. Sonic would fight Nephthys, and ultimately Nephthys would lose. She's also got some kind of interesting backstory about how she joined the Eggman Empire to help keep the people of Medesta safe, and ultimately had chosen the lesser of two evils, and she struggles with her decision, and it's cool to see how she works with the Medesta freedom fighters, but ultimately there's not really that much else to her that's shown, unfortunately, in the short amount of time that we have with her. And that's it for the first 6 egg bosses, and those are the only 6 that are initially shown up until this point in the Archie Sonic comics, but there are 6 more who will show up in the Sonic Universe comics, so strap in as we go through them, and we get an even dozen eggs. So, just as a setup, remember Naugus? I talked about him in another video, and I'll jog your memory with this one short clip of me talking about him. So here's the TLDR. He's basically a bat, but not a busty bat like the other bat that we know from Sonic, but instead a kind of magical bat. Yes, I know that he is a troll, but the bat joke was funnier. Anyway, Naugus' name is Walter, which takes away actually any real threat that he has at all, and also now after the Super Genesis Wave, he has a sister named Wendy, and in this new world, Walter and Wendy have taken over Eggman's home turf, and it's here that Eggman gets attacked by some magic users who ride on hoverboards from Sonic Riders, which weirdly isn't the only Sonic Riders reference we're going to see, but I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. My favorite of the 3 is probably this rabbit, but an honorable mention goes to the grizzly bear, whose name is Behringer. I mean, that's just a funny name. From here, Eggman gets put into his place, and he calls in the egg bosses, and let's take a look at these newcomers. So, first of all, we have Battlelord Kuku the 15th, or I assume he's the 15th and his last name isn't just Gzv. He's from an old family of birds who have been ruling the sky since the fall of Babylon, which I assume again is a callback to Sonic Riders, as he does bring up his dislike for the Babylon rogues. But also, wouldn't it be kind of funny if Babylon and the Tower of Babel existed in Sonic? I mean, it would make sense, right, considering that paganism exists? Anyways, he also has this pretty big interest in explosives. Following Kuku is Akhlut, who we had looked at previously, and we actually pretty much said everything there is to be said about him. He was the leader of a tribe that rivaled Tundra's tribe, and now he's an egg boss. He can also use that gem in his head to break people's minds, and yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. It seems like there might be a bit of a trend with these new egg bosses not having a ton to them. So let's move on. Here's Maw, and Maw in general just seems kind of smug. He's an interesting character to me though, because he believes that rather than conquering, Eggman is actually saving the world, because he's able to make hard choices and extreme actions like letting animals live forever as badniks. I'm not totally sure I agree with him, but it's cool to see somebody bring a counter view to this, and it's interesting to see somebody whose thoughts on Eggman might line up more closely with what Eggman wants. Also, Maw can use his maw to suck people up, and how that works is pretty unknown, as he says it's confidential, so who knows where all that stuff went to. We have a pirate next up though, and her name is Abyss. She's pretty cool, and I really don't have a ton to say about her, but if not for Clove and Cassia, I think that she would be my favorite on design alone. Basically, she's a pirate, she looks chill, and she seems to take great pride in being a pirate, so I mean, what more can you ask for? And lastly, we have Conquering Storm. She's this sneaky little character who gives off assassin vibes to me. I think actually I could spend a long time talking about her, considering that she has a good deal of info pre-Super Genesis Wave, but not to be a buzzkill, I think that pre-Super Genesis Wave Conquering Storm should be in her own video at some point, with also a little bit of post-Super Genesis Wave story about her, and so I'd like to just hold off on that and one day do a video on her just to give her a proper amount of respect, as she has actually a lot of information on her, rather than just this quick overview, so I'm gonna leave her at that as just a sneaky little character. And with that, we've seen all 12 egg bosses, and yeah, the latter 6 might be some of the least interesting ones, but they're still characters. Now, before we close off, I have some fun facts that I found that I thought would be really interesting and actually a little bit obscure, or at least obscure to me. Lord Kuku, first of all, is actually based on the Battle Fortress in Tails' Adventure. The Battle Fortress is found on Coco Island, which in Japanese was Kuku Island, and it's from there that the Kuku Empire invaded Coco Island, but it's like Coco with an A, like Cocoa, under the lead of Great Battle Kuku, and can I just say, it's a major shame that the Archie version of Kuku didn't have these wild heels that Great Battle Kuku had. On top of that, Tails would also go on to work in a reference with his other video game when going up against Kuku's army inside of the Archie Sonic comics, with Tails leading his assault inside of a ship called the Sky Patrol. And if you thought that was it for Tails Sky Patrol Easter eggs, well, you've got another thing coming. Wendy, remember Walter's sister, is actually based on Witchcart from Tails' Sky Patrol, and her team of magical animals on the Sonic Rider boards, well, they're called the Witchcarters, and each of them are actually based on a boss from Tails Sky Patrol, which honestly kind of cool, weirdly obscure for me. And with that, like I said, we've seen all 12 of the egg bosses during the course that Archie published Sonic the Hedgehog. To be honest, the first 6 are a lot cooler than the last 6, but I feel like a big reason for that is that the latter half just didn't have enough time to develop any of these characters. And just as they had kind of started to get their flow with these characters, Archie Sonic comics just ended, so it's likely that we unfortunately won't see these characters and we won't be able to see how they develop again. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I want to give a special thanks and shout out to Trent with a Trident, who not only suggested this idea on the channel's Discord server, but also helped a ton when it came to finding info on these characters. Initially, I was actually trying to make this a short video to come out back before December, but the video itself just kept growing and growing in scope as I found myself wanting to talk more and more on different characters and aspects. So I want to thank Trent for helping me way back in November, and patiently waiting for months to go by before I finally uploaded this and managed to finish it. If you have any ideas for a topic or just any ideas in general that you'd like to share with me, please let me know either here or on Discord. If you feel like this video has earned a like, subscribe, or whatever, feel free to do so as well. Also, just one last thing before I close off. I have nowhere to put this as it's not really a fun fact, but while reading the comics, look, I found Scourge. He got himself a retail job, he's wearing glasses, and he's hanging out with a lady who's way into the idea of the small flooding. Hood is a Viper from XCOM lacking any kind of snitties, and so he did... Forgot about that line. Other tribe whose name is Akhlut. Oh boy, gotta look up this name. Akhlut. Sonic would also end up meeting one other egg boss who is Nephthys. Boy, another one I have to look up. 1 second. Okay, Nephthys.